The first time I walked into the springhouse at a farm outside Strasburg in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, it was August. I expected relief. I expected damp shelves and maybe a breeze from the creek. But I also expected the lie I had been trained to expect. I expected that somewhere, hidden behind the wall or under the floor, there would be a machine doing the real work. That is how you have been trained too. You hear the word cooling and you picture a compressor. You picture refrigerant lines. You picture a thermostat glowing on drywall. You picture a fan motor, a service truck, a monthly bill, and then another bill after that. You do not picture silence. You do not picture stone. You do not picture water moving under your feet. And you definitely do not picture a cheap white bag of salt from a hardware shelf. The room smelled like wet limestone and old wood. I could hear water, but I could not hear effort. No hum, no vibration, no metallic shudder from a unit trying to stay alive in the heat. Just the slow, patient sound of moving water, and the soft air that settles on your forearms before you realize your shoulders have dropped. I stood there for 11 minutes looking for the expected thing. It was not there. No vent register, no condenser line, no evaporator coil, no secret plug-in device hidden behind a shelf. It was only stone, running water, shade, and mass. It was the old summer logic this country once understood so well that nobody needed to explain it. Then I stepped back outside. That was when the second shock hit me. The heat felt heavier outside than it had before I entered. It felt sticky. The air clung to my face. And that was the moment the whole thing snapped into focus for me. Cooling was never only about temperature. Cooling was about moisture. It was about whether the air would let your skin work. It was about whether the room could shed heat instead of hoarding it. And suddenly, that old, overlooked bag of salt stopped looking like a pantry item and started looking like a key. I had spent years thinking the modern story was complete. I thought the old methods were charming but limited. I thought you needed a machine to get serious results. Standing there, in that Pennsylvania stone room, I realized I had swallowed a sales pitch and mistaken it for physics. The old builders were not primitive. They were observant. They watched what water did underground. They watched how stone delayed heat. They watched what happened when air moved over cool surfaces. They did not have digital thermostats. They had attention. That was enough. And once I started looking, I kept finding the same pattern. In one farmhouse, the sleeping rooms stayed tolerable because the attic vent path opened at dusk, and the sun never touched the west wall directly. In another, damp cloth and carefully placed airflow did more for sleep than a loud window unit. In another, the family used a cool outbuilding in the late afternoon, then purged the main house after sunset. The logic did not. I have been going back to Lancaster County every summer for 3 years now. I go when the humidity makes your shirt stick to your spine before noon. And every time, I find something the building industry forgot on purpose. So here is the promise of this video. You can take a hot, sticky room in a 50-year-old house and make it feel radically cooler. The setup starts with a $5.48 bag of calcium chloride and stays under $150 total. Not thousands, not a financed install, not even a truck roll. And yes, this works even if your house was built 50 years ago. And yes, this works even if you live in a city. Stay with me, because what I found in Lancaster County uses the same physics the Persians used to make desert spaces livable 3,300 years ago. Now, let me anchor this in the science, because once you understand the mechanism, you stop feeling helpless. Your body cools by evaporation. That is not a theory, it is the system. When sweat evaporates, it pulls heat from your skin. When the surrounding air is already swollen with moisture, evaporation slows down. Your skin stays wet, but you do not get the cooling benefit you paid for. That is why 81 degrees can feel gentle one night and oppressive the next. The number on the wall is not the whole story. The air has to accept moisture. The U.S. Department of Energy says evaporative coolers can reduce incoming air by 15 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and they use about 1/4 as much energy as central air conditioners in low humidity conditions. Then the National Renewable Energy Laboratory pushed the logic further in a 2012 liquid desiccant report. The lab found that drying the air first can reduce HVAC energy use by 34% in humid climates. Read that again. Dry first, cool second. That is the sequence modern houses keep pretending does not matter. This is where salt enters the picture. Not table salt, not the dusty shaker on your dinner table. I am talking about a hygroscopic salt, usually calcium chloride. It does something your air conditioner also has to do, but with no compressor. It grabs water vapor out of the air. It lowers the latent load. It changes the feel of the room before it changes the number. Once the air is drier, every low-tech cooling step that follows starts working harder. Your skin works harder. Your whole body stops fighting the room. Think of it like your own sweat becoming a better tool the moment the room stops blocking it. Or think of a cast iron skillet. A skillet holds heat because mass matters. Now flip the idea. Stone, water, and shaded airflow hold cool because mass matters in the other direction too. Salt does not replace those things. Salt clears the path for them. It strips away some of the wet burden that makes summer air feel dead. In building terms, this is a coefficient of performance story, even if nobody on a sales brochure will say it that way. A simple fan-driven evaporative stage can deliver roughly 4 units of cooling effect for every 1 unit of electrical input. That happens once the air is dry enough to accept evaporation. Compare that with the larger compressor-based system. It has to force dehumidification, reject heat outdoors, and power a sealed mechanical loop. The gap is real. And the gap gets bigger when you remember what part of summer misery is actually humidity. The machine market wants you to think cooling is a box. It is not. It is a sequence. First you manage sun, then you manage mass, then you manage air movement, then you manage moisture. When you reverse that order, you buy horsepower for a problem the room itself should have solved. That gap represents billions of dollars in equipment, installation, filters, refrigerants, warranties, and service contracts every year. And that is why you have never heard of this. The living proof is not buried in a patent archive. It is sitting in plain view in places like Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. I felt it first in that banked springhouse outside Strasburg. Later, I felt it again in an older utility room near East Hempfield Township. The temperature dropped the moment I crossed the threshold. Not because a machine clicked on, because it never had to. The air felt washed, quiet, manageable. I could hear flies outside the doorway, but not a single motor inside. One afternoon, a man named Eli stood with me near a shelf of Crocs. He told me something so simple it annoyed me. He said, "Cool is easy. Dry is the part people forget." He said it while holding a Croc that had sat in that cool room since morning. He was talking about butter, but he could have been talking about bedrooms. He could have been talking about basements. He could have been talking about every suburban house that traps wet heat behind closed blinds and wonders why the bill climbs. What stayed with me was not only the line, it was the confidence behind it. Eli told me his family had used the same summer logic for 4 generations. Older families, he said, had brought the broader knowledge into southeastern Pennsylvania from the Palatinate, Alsace, and Canton burn. The tools changed with the farm, the logic did not. Cool water, thick walls, night air, managed moisture, repeat. That history is written down. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission says springhouses were built over springs or running streams. They provided a cool space and fresh water. It also notes stone-lined channels and tanks engineered for dairy work. The National Park Service says the Hopewell Furnace Springhouse was built in 1806 to 1807. It still carries 56-degree water through its cooling room. That is not nostalgia. That is a measured water temperature still doing useful work more than 2 centuries later. And here is the important part. Nobody in those buildings was trying to win an engineering award. They were solving a daily problem with materials close at hand. The knowledge never disappeared. It was filed away. It was set aside. It was waiting. Once you zoom out, you see the same answer appearing all over the world. In ancient Egypt, people hung wet reeds in windows. Breeze moved through damp fiber and dropped heat before entering the room. That is evaporation, just phase change doing its job. In the Persian city of Yazd, wind catchers pulled air down tall towers. They often sent it across subterranean water before it reached living spaces. The BBC reports that some of the earliest wind-catching technology goes back 3,300 years. The wind catcher at Dowlatabad still rises 33 meters above the garden. Rome found the same principle from another direction. Cool water moved through walls and bath structures, while masonry mass slowed the rush of daytime heat. Korea used ondol floors and thick stone to manage heat storage and delayed release with extraordinary patience. Native peoples of the American Southwest used earth sheltering, shaded openings, and thermal mass. The ground already knew what the afternoon sun would do. Same answer. Nobody handed them a catalog. Nobody handed them a financing plan. The Persians did not read this in a textbook. They figured it out the way all real knowledge gets discovered, by paying attention to what the earth was already doing. Every civilization that mastered extreme heat arrived at the same answer independently. The Amish never forgot. They carried it from the Palatinate to Pennsylvania more than 290 years ago. And they kept building it because it worked, and because they never needed anyone's permission to do what made sense. So why did you stop hearing about it? The origin sits right in the open. In 1930, Thomas Midgley Jr., Albert Henn, and Robert McNary at General Motors introduced the refrigerants that became Freon. General Motors then joined DuPont in Kinetic Chemicals to commercialize the chemistry. It protected a market. Low-tech, climate-tuned cooling threatened repeat equipment sales, proprietary refrigerants, and the whole service economy built around compressor systems. By 1951, Carrier itself described air conditioning as a billion-dollar industry. The suppression mechanism was not one dramatic ban. It was more effective than that. It moved through desire, education, and standardization. In 1956, Carrier shifted hard into mass market persuasion. The company placed its message in the Saturday Evening Post, Time, Newsweek, Better Homes and Gardens, and television. The theme was simple: it's time to call Carrier. The Smithsonian has tracked that advertising shift in detail. The ads sold refrigerated living as health, cleanliness, better sleep, happier children, less dust, and modern status. The room no longer had to work. You only had to buy the box. At the same time, post-war building culture moved toward repeatable tracked construction. Levittown, Pennsylvania landed Carrier's largest residential air conditioning contract in 1956. That matters. Once the house is designed around purchased equipment, every local climate habit starts looking old-fashioned. Window placement matters less. Shading matters less. Thick walls matter less. Cross-ventilation becomes a decorative phrase instead of a survival skill. Architecture schools teach load calculations. Contractors teach tonnage. Homeowners learn to fear silence. Nobody told you. Not your builder, not your contractor, not the man who sold you the unit. The new system did not have to prove the old system failed. It only had to make the old system look embarrassing. That is how knowledge disappears in a rich country, not in flames, in brochures. You can trace the allies. Carrier bought the dream through magazine pages and television spots. Time, Newsweek, Better Homes and Gardens, and the Saturday Evening Post took the advertising money. General Motors and DuPont supplied the chemistry through kinetic chemicals. Federal financing and post-war subdivision logic normalized houses built for equipment first and climate second. Different desks, same direction. Different logos, same river of money. An entire field of knowledge disappeared from architecture schools, building codes, and contractor culture. Not because it failed, because it was not profitable. And the continuation is still happening now. In the fight over the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, the National Association of Home Builders objected. The group objected when aggressive efficiency proposals survived the online vote. That was framed as an affordability fight, but underneath it sat the real argument. Do you reduce the load first, or keep feeding bigger systems into bigger loads? In 2023, Open Secrets lists $1,210,410 in federal lobbying by the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, and $2,683,953 by Carrier Global. The financial motive did not vanish. It matured. The U.S. HVAC systems market was valued at $29.89 billion in 2024. Every alternative installed is one less machine sold. It is one less refill and one less replacement cycle renewed. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people starting fresh, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to buy equipment. You need a weekend. You do not need permission to test this in your own room tonight first. Here is the exact retrofit I would build first in the house you already own. I would not start with the whole house. I would start with the room that punishes you most. Usually that is the bedroom where you lose sleep and then lose judgment the next day. Choose one room between 120 and 180 square feet. Pick a window that can exhaust air cleanly, and if possible, a second opening on the cooler side of the room. If you only have one workable window, the system still helps, but two openings work better. Cut a 1/2-inch plywood insert to fit the inside sash width of your intake window. In most houses, that width lands between 24 and 34 inches. Cut the panel so it seals tightly but can still come out in autumn. In that panel, make one 4-inch intake hole low, about 3 inches above the sill line. Then make one 4-inch relief hole high, about 12 to 16 inches above the first. Fit both with short sections of Schedule 40 PVC. Add a downward elbow on the outside intake so direct sun and rain do not pour in. If you want the cleaner version, paint the exterior face white. Now build the drying stage. Get a shallow stainless tray or a rigid polypropylene pan, roughly 9 by 13 inches and about 2 inches deep. Suspend a second perforated tray 1 inch above it with cedar or pine spacers. Fill that upper tray with 4 to 6 pounds of calcium chloride pellets. Use clean pellets. Skip mixed driveway blends. Skip scented moisture absorbers. Skip table salt. Calcium chloride matters because it pulls moisture aggressively and forms a manageable brine as it works. Next, build the cooling stage behind it. Hang a strip of unbleached muslin cotton, 24 inches wide and 36 inches long. Let the lower edge dip 2 inches into a second pan of clean water. I like muslin because it wets evenly, releases evenly, and dries without the plastic feel that ruins performance. Muslin cotton is not optional. Polyester causes beading, slows evaporation, and leaves you with a damp rag instead of a cooling surface. Use cotton. Set the salt tray where incoming air reaches it first. Then let that partially dried air move across the wet muslin. That order matters. Dry first, cool second. If you reverse it, the cloth saturates the air too early and the room starts feeling swampy. If you stage it correctly, the system feels very different. The air coming through the insert no longer feels sticky and dull. It feels lighter, sharper, more useful to your skin. On the opposite side of the room, place a 20-inch box fan in the exhaust window, facing outward. Low speed is enough in most rooms, usually 55 to 75 watts. You are not trying to blast yourself. You are trying to create direction. Pull the warm indoor air out and let the treated intake air replace it. Crack the bedroom door about 1 inch so the pressure path stays open. If the room has a transom or upper vent, open that too. Then kill the daytime heat load. Cover the worst sun-facing glass with low-E radiant foil. Mount it 3/4 of an inch off the pane with cardboard or cork spacers. That lets the foil reflect instead of conducting heat. If you have west-facing glass, cover that first. If the room has blackout curtains, leave an air gap behind them. If you have attic access, open the attic purge path after sunset. That lets trapped hot air leave above you instead of sinking back into the ceiling mass. The cost stays almost insulting. The plywood usually runs $12 to $18. The PVC and elbows run $14 to $28. The muslin costs $7 to $14. The trays cost $8 to $16. The calcium chloride runs $6 to $11 for a starter batch. Low-E radiant foil adds $18 to $24. If you need the box fan, add $22 to $39. Even with a few screws, weather strip and spacers, you land around $87 to $150 total. The first build takes one Saturday morning. The second room takes half that. And yes, it performs on a bad day. On a 95-degree day, this staged setup can make a bedroom feel 8 to 14 degrees better by late evening. You will feel the biggest difference in the humidity burden on your skin and sheets. You will notice it most in your breathing, your pillow, and the fact that the room stops feeling wet. That is the point, not just lower temperature, usable air. Maintenance is simple. Check the calcium chloride brine weekly in heavy weather. Recharge or replace the pellets once a season. Wash the muslin every month. Drain and rinse the water pan every week. If you see dust buildup, rinse the intake elbow. That is it. No refrigerant leak search. No capacitor. No compressor failure waiting for the hottest day of the year. And let me put the choice back where it belongs. Your conventional central system costs $6,500 to $14,800 to install. It costs around $148 per month to run through summer in many homes, and it lasts 12 to 17 years before it heads toward a scrapyard or landfill. This costs $87 to $150 total. It lasts as long as you maintain it. Your choice. Everything I've covered, root cellar summer cooling, lime wash attic heat control, and window shade airflow geometry, now lives in one place. Step by step, season by season, room by room, in the order the families actually use it. Link is in the description. But stay here, because what Eli showed me in that stone room is the part nobody is talking about yet. If you're the kind of person who believes real knowledge has been pushed aside, you already know what to do. It happened to protect someone else's profit. Hit subscribe. Not for me, for what comes next. Because this is not a channel. This is a quiet movement of people who have decided they're done being sold what they already own. I want to hear from you. Drop your state, your hottest monthly power bill, and whether your grandparents ever used a springhouse, wet sheet trick, or cellar room. I read every single one, and your answers decide what we cover next. Next week, I'm going to show you a 1946 Penn State document about keeping an attic from turning bedrooms into ovens. The technique uses nothing but lime, burlap, and an air gap. And the report from 1946 proves extension engineers knew about it decades before telling you to just buy more tonnage. You're not going to want to miss that one.